strong 2 picks in the first round of the draft. They're going to start on the blue, though. Can they engineer this super priority pick, the Ryze, the Kalista? As you mentioned, they don't always default to the Kalista. Sometimes they're happy to leave it open, but it's going to be interesting to see how they kind of go with it, especially starting on the blue side.
Yeah, and one thing about KT is that there are always these power picks that seem to slip through the cracks. They have, I think, overall probably the best draft of any team here in Korea. They managed to get what they want.
I am series excluded.
I am series excluded. That is very true. Well, let's see what we do. Let's get into picks and bans. Victor off the table immediately. So the Victor bans continuing against KOO here, but KOO, of course, will have that chance to perhaps play the Kassadin in the last pick. And there's Sivir, the KT special.
So we saw some blue side Ryze bans. Yes, I believe it was Spenu that was forced to ban it on the blue. I guess not confident in picking up for their own team. We're expecting Ryze bans to default onto the red side. LeBlanc, very standard ban coming through. Third here, the Ryze is the big question mark. Everyone knows its power. We've seen the games over in the LCS where it's really taken over the game. But 2 AD carry bans towards Arrow, and the Vayne pick is actually a very significant one. Just looking at his solo queue, been playing a lot of Vayne. It seems like it's the sort of thing that would fit into the comps that KT like to put together. So probably good scouting coming out from KOO.
Yeah, and the Vayne, not something we've seen much from Arrow this season. Obviously, his past few games have been just loaded with that Sivir and Kalista. And are they going to go for 380 carry bans? No, Kalista banned actually by KT.
There's still 380 carries banned away, and what's left is the question. Will we have to see the default to the Lucian? Ryze is available as Evelyn is the last ban away. Score has actually been taking a page out of Clearlove's book. Warrior into Trinity Force for a carry, but Ryze is available and has to be locked in.
Wow, that's a big surprise that they would think that the Evelyn, which is something that Score plays a lot in solo queue.
The carry Evelyn as well.
I doubt he would go for the Trinity Force, but they're going to get the Alistar and the Gragas here as the price for this Ryze. What can they do with it? They will have some early pressure in the top side.
Ryze is just such a wonderful champion to gang for, especially now that he basically has perma CC from a few levels in onwards. What are they going to round it out with? Are they going to try and pick strong lanes to complement the Ryze that always draws a lot of attention, either friendly or foe, from the junglers? 80 carry pool so shallow. Maybe that's just a priority to pick one up, but no necessarily forced into that.
Yeah, Prayton will probably default to Corki in this game for the safety, especially he needs some escapability in the backline against this Ryze to make sure that the Rune Prison range isn't achieved. Now, Nunu Thresh, this could be a good setup for an Azir in the mid lane.
Azir hyper carry is what's shouting out to me. You've got Ryze, who's just an immovable force, probably going to be at the front of a fight, relatively tanky, but still controlling space by his damage threat. Absolute Zero, the box, potentially the Azir Emperor's Divide. Suddenly so much space for a hyper carry. Some of the popular ones banned away. They're actually thinking about something a bit different with the Ezreal. As you're correct, the early power spikes, this is the KOO special. Rumble Corki locked in on the red side.
Yeah, they're going to be looking to fight early, and I prefer KOO going for some of these more early to mid-game compositions, considering the problems they've had picking up kills. But Wisdom on that Grog is something that he has delivered kills to Prey and Gorilla on. And Arrow, that's definitely a possibility.
It's what I was thinking. Of course, known for this champion back in the day, back when I was watching 2014, Arrow always threatened the Draven. We never saw a lot of it. But with all this space control, now potentially an Orianna ball to have to also factor in, it's not quite the Azir, but hyper carry is what they're demanding.
Well, sad we're not going to see that. We did see one game of it last season. Didn't work out for Arrow very well. But Ezreal, long time pickup here for Arrow, and there is the Varus in response to the Orianna in the mid lane. So he's going to have a lot of freedom to farm and poke in that lane, and they're going hard for this mid-game power spike. Very reminiscent of what SK Telecom would run with this mid lane Varus. And if they miss that timing, though, they will have trouble late because this Ryze will be all over them. KT lacking a little bit in the engage department, though. They may have trouble actually locking down the Varus in the back line.
I mean, the line skill shots under a turret when we're talking about sieging, the Varus piercing arrow and the Corki missile is going to be so much to handle. And there's not a lot of initiation. That's what they've noticed about this KD Rolster side, is that Ryze basically has to, you know, put his Nikes on and charge at you. Nunu much better in the peeling sense. Unless the flanks can come through with some early turrets, ending the siege. Not going to be straightforward for KT.
There's a lot of pressure on Fixer to land hooks in this composition. Fortunately for KT, we saw so many Thresh bans against Fixer. It hasn't been a priority for him this season, but he's bringing it back right now. Can he get the initiations that they need to shut down the Tigers? Because otherwise, there's not really a lot of ending to this poke war that's going to happen, and Ezreal just isn't enough to cut it against Varus Corki.
And that's kind of my worry, is that basically KT's picked up a lineup that's going to catch poke. They don't have a lot of initiation. It's a risk.
All right, guys, let's get in the game and see what we see with KOO versus KT. All right, welcome. KT Rolster versus the KOO Tigers. KT getting the 5.10 rise, the first time we've seen it in Korea, but how is he going to stop the poke coming in from KOO?
And it's notable, though, on patch 5.9, actually the last series we saw KT play against IM, Someday was drawing Rise bans even in that slightly underpowered state compared to now, which, to be honest, overpowered state you might be willing to leverage towards the Rise. There's a lot of power in the pick, but when you actually think about it in terms of comps, it's hard to see how Rise will really fulfill a role in the late game when there's just so much poke you have to navigate.
Right, and the Sivir ban really, I think, working very well in favor of KOO right here. That's going to make it very hard for Rise. He's extremely flash dependent, and so KT going to have to play around Vision very well and hope that Fixer can get some picks right here. Also, just in terms of laning, yeah, there's kill pressure with Rise with that W, but Score not exactly playing a very gank-heavy jungler this time around. He's going to have to provide vision and see if Someday can just straight up win that 1v1.
I mean, just kind of my worry is that when you look at these Orianna comps, okay, the wave clear that comes from mid is going to be very useful, but who's the ball carrier? Is it going to be a Rise flank with home guards? Is that what we're talking about? Is that what it's come to?
Pretty disastrous,
basically, I mean,
right?
Coming back to your point, you're talking about initiation from Thresh. I always like to see Thresh as a secondary initiation threat, because if you're relying on the hooks, especially here where basically you'd like a hook, a line, a ball, sinker, everything involved to get some sort of Orianna initiation, there's so many ifs in that statement that you worry for KT in the late game.
Yeah, I think you really do. Well, Fixer here, disrupting the jungling a little bit, just checking in onto Gorilla and Prey for heading to lanes. Standard lanes going to be what we see, and both junglers starting with a small camp before going to the buff. So not a lot of action early on. This will be preferential for KT, and
let's learn about 5.10 Rise, Monte Cristo.
We know all about him already. Yikes. That W Max really going to be doing work, and that Rumble quite vulnerable to a W Max because obviously he pushes up. He doesn't have any movement abilities outside of his flash and a little bit of movement on his shield, but that is going to be really tricky. Gorilla, 100% win rate on this Alistar so far.
It's going to be interesting to see how they play around Rise. Both teams will understand the power of Rise on 5.10. I was noting that in previous casts, whenever you see Rumble overextend, because of course he has more ranged AoE wave clear in the early game. Okay, it takes a while before you get levels in that Flame Spitter, but you often see junglers come in for the counter gank. It's going to be a really interesting interaction around level 4 where we expect to see potentially multiple people up top, or will they just be left on an island?
That's right. Well, both junglers going to be in the top side soon. Crab already taken by Nunu. And looks like Someday wants to let Smeb push it up just a little bit. See, there's not really much you could do with Rise in those early levels.
And this was always seen as a favorable matchup for Rumble back in the day. The turret dives are always very potentially possible. Rise, definitely eminently one of the most turret diveable champions in the league from history. Starting the Doran's ring, this has been the adaptation with the mana ratios changing a little bit. More Doran starts in the traditional Sapphire 2 pots.
Yeah, that's very true. All right, so Someday just going to play it safe underneath the turret, while Smeb goes on a mission into the enemy jungle. He's getting a deep ward down, trying to keep track of this Nunu score. Not up to any shenanigans yet, just a pretty standard jungle clear.
No Bengi Nunu coming through from Score.
A very aggressive style. Well, they don't have the mid pressure to really pull that off right now.
Definitely looking more for the LeBlanc school of mid laner rather than the Orianna if you're going to be in the face of the enemy jungle for basically the entirety of the game.
This is really a return to a lot of what the KOO Tigers used to run back when they were on that massive winning streak at the beginning of spring. Kite composition, emphasis on poke, and on those item power spike timings. So this should be right up the KOO Tigers' alley. Doesn't really show anything we haven't seen from them before, and also not a composition that really leads me to believe that they've fixed a lot of their problems in terms of engage or playing in a meta where the Cinder Hulk is the king.
Just if you're talking about win ratios after the Cinder Hulk patch, KT 6-1. Only that 3-game series lost to CJ since Cinder Hulk came through, just post IM Katowice. On the other side, it kind of lets you know KOO's fortunes 2-6, so they've been super struggling on those later day patches. The way I've looked at it, when I've been trying to just kind of reason out why KOO have been struggling so much, is that KOO obviously had perfected those objective-based comps. They love to run Rumble Victor Corki style comps when they were really powerful. They've always had that low backline threat. It hasn't necessarily been the Hecarim diving the backline. It's been more the Rumble Equalizer potentially zoning. And just with Prey starting to misposition a little bit, even on trademark champions like Corki, if you run low backline threat in a meta where people are happy to pick the Varuses, and of course Kalista, who was a factor last season but was permanently banned, if you have no backline threat, if you open up a hyper carry to just put out damage, you're kind of in that bind where you just will lose more games than you win.
Well, it's also that a lot of the poke was nullified by the tanks coming into play.
Sure.
And so the ability for them to poke someone off before a hard engage window could be found was narrowed drastically.
You can poke out a Lissandra, but can you poke out the Cinder Hulk into Randuins, into other tank item top laners? And as you point out, not so easily.
Right. Well, Gorilla now making his way up to the top side. Looks like we want a gank here to shut down this Rise early. Tier already purchased someday. Not having to use his TP right there, though, and everyone stacking up in the topside equalizer.
Level 6, importantly, is hit by Someday. With 3 members, they're certainly going to have the CC to take him down.
Well, they'll have the damage, too, and Score has been under control for most of this game. Back in his base right now. This wave could be a good dive opportunity. Smeb, here we go.
It's in vision.
Up. And look at that, just a flash forward onto the equalizer. There's the knockback, and that's going to be first blood taken by Smeb, so they got it where they wanted it. Good setup. And Score just a non-factor on this Nunu. Hasn't been counter-jungling, been getting counter-jungled himself.
Finds wisdom. We're waiting to see what can happen here. Score's got permanent slow, and Gragas has his flash available, though.
Well, no ult here except for the shockwave, but that's just not going to be enough. Actually, Fixer manages to make his way. There's a Varus arrow, and look at this. The Tigers absolutely catching him in the choke right now. Teleport in from Someday. Can they get some work done? Gorilla getting low. No ultimate for him yet. Fixer goes down. And that is Someday. Everyone just piling into the AoE, and a huge number of kills. 4 for 1 for the KOO Tigers. A bit of a disjointed engage right there, and that True Shot Barrage not going to hit a target.
Someday has to teleport back in just to come out with something, picks up a kill, but dies a second time. KT responded first. I thought Nangle might be able to get something done, but it was a one-man shockwave onto a Gragas who still had flash. And the moment the Kuro trotted over on the Varus, hit the Chains of Corruption, the damage was massive. And now the item timing, that's an Abyssal Scepter at 8 minutes for Smeb.
Well, when you get that 100% kill contribution, you can see Smeb on your screen, grinning right there. I'm sure he's extremely happy with what's going on, considering that Someday going for a Catalyst next, so he's going to need a lot of time to hit that power spike. And
an instant power spike versus a delayed power spike. Sad times for us.
Also, double tier. Arrow going for the tier build on the bottom Ezreal. I'm not a fan of it these days. It takes too long to become operational, and you're still going to be struggling while Prey and Kuro absolutely hit their power spikes in that mid game, particularly Prey. The siege is going to be very difficult to deal with, and this is a very interesting issue that we are having right now.
Feeling like a previous stream I was on, Monte Cristo.
Flashbacks to LPL. Well, Smeb is still smiling, so that's good. A smiling Smeb on your stream.
Sometimes all you can do is smile, Monte Cristo.
Looks like it could be just an observer error. We're waiting for this to be resolved right now.
So I think just coming back to your point, we're talking about a Rise who does have to opt into the stacking build. We'll build up the tier into the Rod of Ages, eventually going to be the Ceres Embrace, obviously. Kind of my issues, I agree with you. When we see a team like Invictus Gaming, for example, pick this Ezreal, it's not uncommon for them to just rush a Trinity Force, not opt into the tier into Mana Moon.
I don't think you play that game with this Rise, or with this Ezreal, especially when that Rise is on your team, too. You have to have some sort of coverage for the weakness that he's going to be going through and have confidence that he's going to be able to carry you out into the late game.
So let's give KT the kind of benefit of the doubt, though. Let's live in a world where in the late game, they're able to overcome with the Rise and Ezreal. Because, of course, they've shown previous series where they're happy to understand their power spikes and opt into the late. The big issue, as you mentioned, is they don't have any way to deal with the poke. So I'm not sure if they weather this mid-game storm, there is even the power spike or the big team fight that actually lets their stacking items come unleashed. So that's kind of the issue, is that even though they've identified that they are noticeably weaker in the mid-game, their late game is so execution-heavy, which has honestly been more of a criticism of the KOO Tigers, picking all these early power spec comps that get outscaled. It doesn't even feel or shout out to me that KT Rolster will be able to outscale them this game.
No, well, they may have the potential damage, but that doesn't actually translate into landing that damage on anyone when you can't get in range. So, yeah, I definitely agree with you here. Score, of course, has drawn a lot of Sejuani bans as well. Got his Evelyn banned out this time, but if they had a Sejuani, this would be such a different game.
Sure, absolutely. With the Sejuani, suddenly Rise just activates his ultimate, maybe has to flash in aggressively, but you need the initiation CC. If your only true initiation or wombo initiation is the Thresh Hook, ball carrying the Orianna, or as I described.
Not looking good.
Exactly. Like, does that happen once in a game? Maybe. But more often than not, it doesn't happen at all.
All right. Well, we're still working on the spectator issues here, guys. Looks like there's some trouble rejoining the game.
This is just a hazing thing, I'm sure. You have to have that traditional fill during your first broadcast, Monte Cristo.
We've been having this issue once before this season already. So I hope it doesn't take too long to resolve. Looks like we're just going to watch some replays of tower dives in the meantime. The Smeb follow-up flash after the equalizer. Rune Prison goes down, but it's just a very easy dive.
But one thing you noticed there, when the Rune Prison came through, it actually changed the direction that the Flameset was coming out. So potentially, there might have been a scenario where they didn't have to use Alistar Flash. That was an unfortunate interaction. I think that just happens sometimes when you take minion aggro. The gank continue, of course, Rise will eventually teleport back up. It's the one-man Shockwave, and with that cooldown down, Varus, you can see on the minimap, is still coming into this, so he's not doing any damage. But the damage, when you're talking about Orianna, the other game's so low. The poke comes through from Kuro, and the health bars are high enough that Varus can free auto in the backline and do fine.
Right. The other big thing there was the fact that this Varus running heal to save Smeb and keep him dealing damage throughout this entire engagement. They had been able to take down Smeb earlier. They cut down a lot of that early game damage from the Rumble. And so Kuro using that summoner spell made a big, big difference. Are we going to get back into this game now? Looks like this is the same issue we were having earlier this season, where the game will not load for the spectators.
Feels like if it was Emax Rise, there could have been more kills, but not really favoring the meta. Honestly, when I saw everyone grouped up, in my head, Rise on 5.10 is like basically late game Rise at level 5. So I was like, oh, all right, pentakill's coming out, boys. Didn't quite happen in this particular situation, and someday, man, opting into a power trough, as you have to on Rise, even with this kind of super powered, it's almost getting to the point where it's a bit mythical how strong Rise is right now. Like when you're against an Abyssal Scepter at 8 minutes, even those balance numbers don't really mean a lot.
And one of the problems with the Tigers was their shoddy execution of certain plays. But you and I were talking about this. When they played CJ in that game 1, there were a million ways for CJ to disengage from that composition. And basically, the Tigers had to play it out perfectly every time to get onto the enemy team. And they did. CJ was running a Protect the Vayne comp. They had an Azir to stop them. So many tools to prevent the Alistar from getting on top. But the execution was just so clean from the Tigers in those team fights. And we really saw it there on this gank as well. They played that out about as well as they could have given the circumstances.
Execution heavy has been the Tigers' way all season. They're still enjoying these Corki comps that honestly fell out of the meta. It felt towards the end of last season. They're just erring towards them. That's their comfort. They're excellent at the late game team fighting, even when they've opted into team comps that aren't necessarily picked for that particular stage. they're pulling it off. They're looking better against CJ. On a different day, they could have won that series. So going to feel a bit of confidence as I think we're going to hopefully load it back into the game very shortly.
Yeah, looks like we are back in. And everything seems to be running smoothly. I think the players just checking out what's going on, and here we go.
Back into the action. This mid lane battle, I've been trying to kind of reason all the Varus priority. Pawn played it twice in the first week of the LPL, then it's kind of overtaken the world scene. EU innovating. Of course, Power of Evil was the one that debuted onto the scene. The reworked Varus in the mid lane. So much wave clear is kind of the difference between him and some other champions, and the poke is on such a short cooldown. And when you pick up the tier and just pick up blue buffs, instant poke from out of vision is very, very powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Fall behind, though, of course, that vulnerability to ganks, especially pre-6, does make it difficult. And if you miss that power spike, you just never do damage, pretty much. So there are ways to shut it down, but, you know, against a Nunu, that's less likely to happen. Fixer getting dove underneath this turret. There's an equalizer coming in off the TP. And Prey and Gorilla not even really needing Smeb right there, but they're going to back it up with the Dragon take. Smeb gets the assist. That 100% kill contribution, easy Dragon for the Tigers.
And Score is still doing his best Evelyn impression, and not in the good way in Monte Cristo. Still no real pressure around the map, has an assist to his name. Crucially didn't die in the previous engage, but an unanswered Dragon for the KOO Tigers. Okay, it buys a bit of time for Rise to pick up a Catalyst, but we're not talking about a Rod of Ages. It's still going to be a significant power trough for someday, and a Dragon to show for KOO.
Yeah, and what I really like about KOO is finally we have a game where they're getting kills in the laning phase. They're actually playing more aggressively. They're not just sitting back and waiting for the enemy to control the tempo of the game. Here they are in KT's face, a team that is known for their early game aggression here in this Korean league. And
you look at their lineup, though. It's not really an early game aggression lineup. Orianna really needs a second AP item. Usually they need a large rod on top of the likes of the Athenes to do damage. You saw in that engage, Wisdom was on, what, a third health and still didn't die? Multiple members coming to top. It looks like everyone's going to back off.
Yeah, they're sitting in the try, seeing if they could perhaps make a play onto Smeb, but he's just so damn strong right now. Tons of wards as well to cover his rear as he continues to push up. Someday, naturally falling behind in terms of CS as well in this jungle. And this is looking pretty desperate right now. KOO should have no trouble hitting a power spike and pretty convincingly closing this game out with this 3K gold lead. This is a pretty ideal situation for them. And here we go, Prey. Wow, the dives keep on rolling in. There's the equalizer. Fixer getting caught. Gorilla nets the kill.
What is KT doing? They kept trying to tend towards this area that lines up for a beautiful equalizer. There was at least 3 or 4 moments there where an equalizer could have come down to get a pick. They get it. And you see a preview of what we're going to see all throughout this game when we flash towards the mid lane. So much poke onto the Orianna between Varus and Corky.
Yep, and they were free just to leave that lane at bottom. You'll notice, oh wow, here we go. Here is the infinite CC chain. Oh, barely living through that.
Somebody did a fadeaway there. It looked like he was confident the last Overload would kill, but of course not maxing Overload. The damage is not quite the same. Any semblance of damage from the jungler and it would have gone down, but the Snowball Abyssal Scepter doing work.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, you know, he wasn't very confident about what was going on. I think he saw Wisdom coming up as well. So was a little bit more cautious in that scenario. But the fact that a 1 and 2 Rise can do that against a 2-0-4 Rumble is a problem. This is why it is banned.
And of course, it's going to be the same on patch 5.11. This is a preview for at least, what, 3-4 weeks of competitive league.
Please don't remind me, Papa.
I mean, I'm excited. You know why? Because it means that champions like Kalista and other champions are going to slip through these picks and bans. We are going to see some of these fabled picks that just don't often come through the picks and bans. So, look, strategic diversity, pick Rise, ban Rise. Not the most strategic diversity there, but hopefully it opens up a bit of excitement in the other picks.
Yeah, possibly. We'll see. Echo could reach permaban status as well once he comes live next week. And that'll mean that Red Side is going to have some troubles in terms of banning. Be very interesting. We'll see how it rolls when everything settles down. But looks like we are a little bit stuck with this for the next month or so. Time Smeb just continuing to push up right here. Someday actually not getting his tower chipped too badly.
Look, Sunday's just trying to opt into the longest laning phase possible. If he can show up at a fight with Seraphs and a Rod of Ages at 10 stacks, he'd be very, very happy. So you'd expect multiple members from KOO to eventually start rotating top, especially because the Dragon's been down a few minutes. Still not going to respawn for, what, 2.5 minutes or so at this point. But they're happy kind of opting into the late game. It's honestly what they did when they picked Ryze, Orianna, solo lanes. Ezreal as well in a power trough. Score finally comes around the lane, but sits in a ward, and he's still Nunu, so not much going to happen there.
Yeah, it's just so hard to picture a scenario where KT wins. They pretty much have to get a pick and control vision very heavily in order, even in the late game, in order to get the damage down and then try and force a Baron or force fights around objectives. But KOO has the ability to play very patiently here, and we're going to take a pause because I guess it just wasn't enough before, as a lot of the members of KOO head into the bottom side in order to take down this tier 1 turret, increase that gold lead even further. There is Smeb. We get a lot of long, loving looks at Smeb today.
At 6-1, and he has a hand in every single kill, Monty. So show us Smeb when you can. He deserves the attention.
What about Gorilla? You're always forgetting about the support.
Gorilla, top 10 solo queue, obviously a very mechanically skilled player. We're not going to see the Bard this game, but obviously holding out hope to see Bard ever since it came onto the competitive scene. PYL showing what an excellent Bard player is. I'm sure you love those Bard mechanics he had on display that game.
Yeah, PYL. Maybe not the world's best Bard, but neither is Gorilla. So I think the most impressive Bard.
So is Sweet the world's best Bard? We don't know.
We don't know. It's a mystery. That's the great pick and ban mystery of Sweet never being able to actually play Bard and then not choosing it when he has the opportunity. We will see it someday, but obviously
someday.
Not today. Not a very, very feared pickup. And I am very worried about KT in this match. Very, very concerned.
I mean, the streaky play that we kind of saw, obviously starting off really poorly in Spring Split, then really picking it up and parlaying that into a nice start. You just don't really know where it all came apart at the seams. It just, the pick and ban identity that they had against Samsung, they had in the first couple of weeks of the season, is kind of leaving them. And the IM series is kind of a preview for what is a scattered. Is this just reactionary picking? They're on the blue side, so they're kind of forcing their hand early, but I just don't know how you end up with a team that doesn't look great mid, early, or even necessarily in the late game against the opposition, at least, that the KOO Tigers are fielding.
It does bring up a lot of questions, and especially after their IM series. And KT, a team that wasn't only good this season in picks and bans, but they were routinely given the tools all of the spring season as well to deal with the opposition, and it was the players failing to execute or understand those comps that I think was really the larger issue for KT. But now, last couple of weeks, it does give me a bit of pause to see the kind of team compositions that they've been selecting here. As we wait for this delightful pause to end. You really wanted this first day, just like tons of downtime, you know?
Well, you know, you come into this first cast a bit nervous, you know, new broadcasting, come and get the beautiful makeup on, trying to look good. And then, yeah, you just have to have this kind of traditional pause to just get yourself in, blow away all your troubles. That's just what has to happen. I want to talk about Ryze. Now, a lot of people, when you're talking about Ryze, you're like, man, this guy's powerful. He's going to rule the game. But the thing that I think people need to understand is that he's kind of been front-loaded in terms of power. He was always very strong in the late game. It's just that his early game went from being super weak to being super powerful when you're exploiting the uptime on Rune Prison. So I think you just have to say that in the late game, he's not necessarily released Xin Zhao in terms of effect, but his early game is so strong that he more reliably gets to the late game. It's just that in this particular game, that late game doesn't look like it's going to be enough.
Yeah, well, I still think that if they had the hard engage, they could definitely recover from this situation.
I'm just saying, given the 5v5 team fight, even if Ryze hits 3, 4 items, okay, 6-item Ryze, anything can happen. Flank engage with home guard, pentakill, potentially. But realistically,
if someday can pull off a Ryze flank, pentakill, I will be incredibly impressed.
We can dream. I've seen stranger things in the LPL, Monte Cristo.
I believe you. We've all seen Stranger Things in the LPL.
What's your favorite of the LPL specials? Because there's all sorts of standby picks.
I liked the Oscar night where no one wanted dragons. That was the best one.
And that was, see, I stood with
over
people
100
watching that
game.
particular game, and I sat down with one of the other casters, and I was like, okay, how do you know that this game, people aren't necessarily taking it very seriously? And the instant answers are, oh, there's a Bard in the game. Some of the non-meta picks, I think Karthus top in that game, all sorts of crazies. I was like, okay, look at the timer, and it was like 35 minutes into the game. There was 0 dragons, none. So I'm pretty sure dragons are quite an important part of League of Legends. In fact, the early games become so much more important this season because you have to control that objective or give it up and take Baron at 22 minutes if you're some teams. No dragons at 35 minutes, probably a little sign there.
Right. Not only that, but just the the sheer volume of kills in that game, a little bit of a tip-off as well.
Just a little. I mean, that happens all the time in the LPL. I'm still getting used to it. I've been watching these champions VODs and not seeing a lot of kills between dragons. Dragon fights and then everyone lanes for a bit. That's something new for me.
It's just about controlling that farm, playing that very evenly paced game, maximizing every edge, maybe not going for those rolling the dice.
The farming champions, that's always the way forward. That's the fun thing to do.
If you can do it without forcing an apocalyptic team fight where you lose the game or a Baron half of it. See, that's
what I've learned, though, is that when you lose that apocalyptic fight at 40 minutes, somehow you still get a chance for another one. And if you hit the execution the second time around, the first one's a mulligan, you win the game anyway.
That's it.
That's it.
All right.
Is this going to be different?
I think it will be. I know it's an uncomfortable a place for you to be.
So what percentage of time?
Calculated plays, calculated risk.
Okay. See, this is a misnomer. People are like, okay, the plays in the LPL aren't calculated. I can't agree with that. I need you to take that back. You know why? What happens is, if you've noticed this season, the warding's a lot better. You've got ward supremacists like Marta coming into the lineup, getting great wards down. But what you don't understand, Monte Cristo, no, listen.
I like the phrase ward supremacist.
Specialist.
Anyway.
Look, I could have gone worse. But regardless, the thing about vision in the LPL, you put down the ward, you see the jungler coming. Do you know what you think, Monte Cristo? You think double kill. That's what you think. Whereas in this particular league, you back away. Like, okay, I have this information. I'm going to lose a couple of CS. That's what, 30 gold. I'm not worried about that. In the LPL, double kill, highlight reels, the fans.
Yeah.
You just have to go for the big plays.
Yeah, that must be it. I won't pretend to know the motivations, Papa Smithy. It's a distant place, the LPL, where I don't understand what happens or why picks are big or why people first pick Cinderhulk Fizz.
I think Fizz is good.
First pick?
No.
Great.
My favorite thing about Fizz, and this was more the case when I used to play AP Fizz, but the ultimate is so deceptively strong. Now, of course, all the power's been loaded onto the ultimate. You get a damage amp from it, but the CC effect, a 1.5 second slow into a 1 second knockup into a 1.5 second slow, an AoE slow, of course, on the other targets if they're knocked out. We're still talking about 4 seconds of CC, the longest CC in the game. That's 50 to 70% as you level it up. There's a lot of things Fizz doesn't provide, wave clear, for example, unless you're Zatai building a Hydra, and then you've probably got other problems. But Fizz does a lot of things in the late game, but yeah, the trade-off of basically being a non-factor in lane.
I agree. There's that big upside to the Cinderhulk Fizz. It looks amazing if you get going, but if you don't get going, there's so many problems. You tend to fall behind in Global Gold if they realize it. I mean, we saw it yesterday when we saw Najin playing against Spenu, and just the punishment that came from the lack of Fizz wave clear resulted in this massive early game snowball of gold from towers that Spenu simply couldn't recover from, and that Fizz was really never relevant.
Fizz is a very good lane to gank for, though, so there is always the snowball potential. But I know that you're always a bit risk-averse with your picks, so I can agree that in the long run, when teams get used to playing against this Fizz, it's probably not going to snowball as many times as it doesn't snowball, but the upside is pretty high. And if you ever get into solo kill range, like we've definitely seen Fizzes overtake Maokai's in terms of being able to 1v1 them every time they come to lane. Maybe less so when you're going Cinderhulk into Frozen Heart and going for the more team fight build. But you kind of have two schools of thought. Take Ignite, build full damage, and kill tanks and potentially get that backline assault off in a fight. Or go for the tank route you have a lower item cap. You can just build Cinderhulk, Frozen Heart, and basically rely on being an annoyance in fights. Which one's the better one? It seems like the Smite at least lets you exit lane, but is it a first pick champion? I think pretty happily no is the answer to that one.
Well, at least we're not seeing it first pick here, or on either side, really.
Well, there's still time.
There's still, oh, geez.
The season is young.
It's okay, Rise is here to take over first pick status, Papa.
Yeah, Rise is silly.
Yeah, sure is. All right, are we actually getting back into this game? We've been stuck in the loading screen, and we're back. We're back.
Hopefully.
So, all right, see what's going on here. Scoring Someday. Actually, some exciting stuff going on. Tower dive, Someday coming in, score, tanking the turret. Someday moving forward with the W, and that'll be a kill, unfortunately, for Fixer. Someday could have used that gold just to get that Rod of Ages just a little bit faster. Kill's a kill, though. Put some damage down onto the tower, but there's a lot going on the bottom side. Turret in favor as KOO stacks the bottom of the map. 3 people, excuse me, on that side.
Definitely seeing the potential of Nunu in a turret dive scenario. That's when he's just able to tank up those extra turret hits, open up the single target damage for Rise. So that's a good movement, but is it 10 minutes too late, Montecu? So that's the question we don't know the answer to quite yet.
And how much are they going to have to dedicate to saving this turret? Rise will be forced to teleport in for it. Walks straight into some poke from Kuro's Varus. And there's Arrow getting out of the way with his E. Now, this siege is so potent right now.
Kuro's locked out, though. They're getting onto the back line. We're waiting to see what happens in this fight. Shockwave hasn't been used. There it is on 3 members, but not a lot of damage behind it. They just don't have a threat on this team here.
Nope. So many tiers, so many stacking items already, and this Corki is good to go right now.
1,700 gold in the bank for Orianna. That's why that Shockwave didn't rip through the team. It only really tickled, honestly, only for the CC effect. And this is mixed damage. Varus, fiercely physical. Magic damage poke coming out from Corki. And this is nothing KT can do.
Yeah. Gorilla also with that ultimate, so he can tank so much of the damage coming out of KT. KT trying to look to stop them here, but continuing to take poke. They can't really contest this red buff right now. Arrow takes another piercing arrow from the side. And will they go for this dragon afterwards? KT chunked out. Kuro will be recalling.
The mana bars weren't there. Prey basically has enough mana for a rocket. Kuro does have mana, but that's because he's back. So they'll back away. There is a window for K to do things, but they're not healthy themselves. We already know that they need to spend their gold before they can realistically fight for any objectives. Should basically be a free shop for the KOO after they pick up 2 turrets in the bot lane.
Right, Smeb staying middle as well, threatening any kind of possible dragon take from KT with an equalizer. Didn't even drop that earlier on, so he's going to return to the top lane. No TP, so playing a little bit fast and loose. But KT, they need to give this one up. This is not really an objective they can contest. They can focus on getting some farm onto Someday on the bottom side, letting his tier stack up. Orianna now with a rod.
But I mean, we're talking about an Abyssal Scepter, Merc Treads, and Aegis already completed by Gragas. It feels like KOO are a step ahead in terms of even the magic resist. The second dragon comes through, nowhere really for KT to contest. I just don't know, even in the KT comms, what the tipping point is they perceive they can actually opt into fights. Because I think we saw a preview of what we're going to see throughout this game, Monty, when they were under that turret siege scenario. KOO can dive with Gorilla and Wisdom tanking up the turret. They can poke so effectively. Physical damage from Varus, magical damage from Corki. They have so many options. They even have disengage from Gragas. KT's options are what? Catch the poke, get hopeful that the ball will get into a place to get a 4-man Shockwave. There's just no options.
Nope. Yeah, this is a very good example of what getting outpicked looks like. When you don't have very many strategic options to win the game, and this is going to be Wisdom just engaging right there. Fixer with the hook in the box, and that'll be Wisdom flashing out. Actually, getting caught in the Raptor Pit, maybe overestimating the amount of backup that he had. And now, just going to return to controlling the area around the Baron. At the very least, KT has some wards, so they don't have to be too worried about that going down.
I think it's important that we distinguish between the comps that, say, KOO have been picking, where they go for really much in the early game, put all their eggs in the early game basket, and at least in that scenario you can say, all right, we'll snowball and we'll win the game even with our earlier power spikes. That's the difference is that KT, they've picked for the late game, and even then they don't really have an overwhelming advantage in the late game. So if you're going to tip your hand towards the early game, if you're going to be in a scenario where you only have one kind of mode of winning, at least focus it around the early game, because snowballing is always a possibility in League of Legends. Very
true. Okay, Siege setting up right now. Poke starting to come in once again as Tigers rally around this tier 2 turret.
I think you need home guard on the Ryze. I know it sounds comical, but Ryze around the backside.
How else are you going to do it? Absolutely.
He needs to try and control space, or at least force people to aggress on him. Then maybe you get the big shockwave you've been itemizing for. But if you just stand like this, they literally have no recourse whatsoever against this poke.
And it's not going to stop anytime soon. Looks like KT opting potentially just to give this one up right here.
We're going to get to a scenario where they get every outer turret. They're going to keep these siege walls up. Of course, a lot harder to siege down the inhibitor turrets, but they're going to have a scenario where they've been poking for 3 minutes. There's no potential for wards to be around Baron, and it should be a largely uncontested objective. So honestly, a throw around Baron, that's the most KT can hope for.
Yeah, the dive just so strong as well, considering the percent damage reduction on Gragas and Alistar. So they don't have to worry about too much, even the crowd control. And they just keep sitting here, slowly working their way.
No big minion wave pressure yet.
Wow.
That's the chain of corruption. Waiting to see if they actually engage. They're going to keep with the poke, but as the engage, we see scorefall very, very low. Fixer in the backline also low, but they're probably just going to take this turret back away.
And there's the follow-up. Shockwave not going to do too much. Arrow eating some rockets, running for his life with that blood boil. There's a rocket.
Oh!
And there's the piercing arrow for the finisher. And everyone just getting roasted as KT bulldozes their way through a tier 2. Got the recall right now. Look how happy KOO is.
It's just on cloud 9.
Well, I'd be happy playing Varus in this game. There's literally no threat to me.
No backline threat, poking away for free. The items coming through as well. We're watching the replay coming through. So the equalizer starts off the fight and we're thinking, okay, do they even have to engage? The turret's still very, very healthy. They're not doing a lot of damage to the backline at this point, because they're focusing on the turret. That's the smart thing to do, is they could go for a massive turret dive. The shockwave, again, the damage is not quite there yet. And with arrow poked out, it was only going to go one way for KOO.
Yeah, that's right. Prey flashing forward for the poke, but KOO actually nails the skill shot in the end. Someday tries to clean up, has to flash out of that though.
Item timings aren't quite there yet. It's going to be, what, 26, 27 minutes till Ryze maybe in that scenario is actually able to duel one person, but how often is there going to be those separated fights where Ryze can run rampant?
Yeah, forever the optimist you are, Papa Smith.
You have to hope for something, otherwise it's just going to be a bulldozer.
Hope is dead now.
Hope is dead?
Hope is dead. The KOO Tigers have officially destroyed hope.
Would you say that wisdom trumped hope?
Well, in this case, I would hope so. And this is just such a almost impossible siege to work with. Wisdom threatening around the back, just looking to see if he can force them back. Otherwise, they have that fear of the explosive cast going down and them landing themselves right in the chain of corruption. KOO sitting there with his Q.
Getting mana moon stacks, because of course you still get the stack even if you don't use the piercing arrow. And there's just nothing that KT can do. In this scenario, they don't even have to use the equalizer to force them away from the fight. They pick up the last of the outer turrets. Baron is looking more and more like a realistic objective, and there's just no camps, no gold, nothing that KT have access to. Barring minions, they're going to start pushing into their inhibitor turrets.
I think that, if anything, the KOO Tigers, the one way they can lose this game is by overreaching for Baron and having Someday TP in and ult them in a pit.
That's what I'm saying. When you're hoping for a Baron throw, you probably didn't pick very well.
It could, the AoE magic damage.
Are you ready for the Baron buff shred into the spell flux shredding percentage as well? And then Nunu one-shotting everyone.
The world's greatest shockwave.
Okay, in my head it's the absolute zero. Yeah,
the absolute zero. Well, that would be a truly epic play, one which we will probably not be seeing this game. Instead, what we will see is a lot of Baron baiting and then KT getting poked out until they can no longer contest. And
definitely the lowest risk double AD comp we've seen in terms of the opponents having engaged. This is nothing. Finally, the home guard boots picked up for Someday, so Optimistic Man can say some sort of flank, but he's not that tanky. He doesn't even have the Seraph shield to show for himself just yet. And we've already saw the red buff stolen away, the blue buff being contested now.
They want it. There's Piercing Arrow. Not going to pick it up as it resets. Second one just a tad too late. But this KOO Tigers team, and to be fair to KT, they haven't seen the KOO Tigers play mid-Varus before, so this is a bit of a new one. But here he is, and of course, just in general, I would not pick a composition with low engage against KOO just because of their reputation for playing these kiting and poke compositions. Now we may see a little bit of a play onto the Baron here. Slow ward clearance as they move through the river.
It's the Ezreal Orianna that kind of is the big issue to me, because of course you first pick that Ryze. We see them aggressing onto Baron, no vision in the area whatsoever. We're seeing Nunu come close, but will the Baron even be alive by the time he gets there?
Probably not. Here we go, KT, but Gorilla clogging the choke right now. There's the chain of corruption, followed by the poke. Lantern will rip score out of the fight. Nagne trying to back off. Equalizer lands. Everyone disrupted by the explosive cast. Smeb on the side, torching Someday, and now Score wandering around, just slapping people with his Yeti in the back of the fight. But that's it. Fixer is going to be the last to fall for the perfect ace, or Gorilla actually managed to die, excuse me, but 5 for 1, and there we go. Here comes the Baron empowered push with zero threat. Wisdom is
dropping some beats.
Dropping the Baron beats. Oktoberfest beats.
And this is certainly not the game we expected to be this one-sided, but honestly, to me, the big litmus test, it's Kuro free hitting on Varus, a champion with no escape in a team fight. That's how low the backline threat was. Basically, Smeb occupied all of Someday's time when he needs to be dealing with the double AD, and this squishy, strong damage core in the backline, free hitting KOO to victory.
Yeah, there's not really a whole lot more to be said about this game, unfortunately. This series, well, we'll see how the rest of it goes. Looking good on paper, but this is a pretty easy win for the KOO Tigers. They've executed well. They got the dives. They prevented Someday from powering up, but other than that,
I just don't understand how they went from a Ryze first pick to a comp that doesn't really make sense in either identity. You could go for a pick comp. If you pick a lot of power and
I really thought we would see Azir here with this Nunu. There we go, equalizer, in the choke. Nagne gonna take a bit of damage right there from the P-bomb. Rockets continue. There is Gorilla. He comes in, but Arrow will flash. Wisdom not done. Nagne under the tower gets slowed. There's no follow-up though.
And Someday still quite intimidating in the front line, watching to see this Ryze damage. Still not at full power. Wisdom should fall though. Dies for free basically, but there's the engage.
Yeah, Smeb's still in the back line, coming in with that teleport. They want this turret. Chain of Corruption goes down, but it doesn't actually lock too many people up. Someday flashing out, just trying to clear out some of these Baron empowered minions as Score gets nuked.
Yep, the damage is just huge from KOO. The item timings aren't there for KT. Tank's position in the front line, well, honestly, only one tank with Alistair being the only one alive. Prey's actually dueling with Arrow, has to flash away.
That's all they got though. One inhibitor, still with the Baron buff for a little bit longer. And they just have control over all the waves right now. They can set up for Dragon number 4 if they see fit. Kuro still just looking to push these waves up, not relieve any of that pressure. And this game has just been a total train wreck for KT.
When is the champion select honestly dictated? There was no clear point of power barring late game damage scaling from the likes of Ryze Orianna. They picked this Ezreal when, of course, honestly, the Draven Azir that we were thinking about probably would have served them better. At least there would be a reason for KOO to have to dive the backline. It's only Ezra who's going to poke around. He's going to blade into Mana Moon.
Well, also, it splits up Wisdom and Gorilla's attention as well. If they have to deal with a Draven versus Corki in the bottom lane, they have to make a choice. Do we stop the Ryze or do we stop the Draven? You can't really affect them both. Go for those lane bullies and then Score can invade on this Nunu, and they can play around it a lot better because they'll know where the jungler is, and that's going to give Arrow and Someday a leash to play aggressively. The Ezreal is such a head-scratcher.
So let's follow that logic. Let's follow what KT have done. See an engage.
Gorilla just flash pulled absolutely nothing right there, so a bit of a misplay.
Just slightly. Obviously went for the flash headbutt pole and was out of headbutt range as far as we can tell.
Yeah, more than likely, and there we go. Gorilla now getting hooked in, has the Unbreakable Will on. There's the shockwave.
Does no damage.
Yes. And there is Someday just melting in the middle of a team fight.
We're just seeing some cleanup here. Waiting to see another piercing arrow potentially take down somebody. Score and the rest of his team just trying to just distract them from finishing the game, but there's nothing they can do, and that's been the tone of all 30 minutes of this game.
Yeah, this siege is just irresistible from the KOO Tigers. They will take a very easy 30-minute win for that Game 1 victory. KT has a lot to think about in this second.